The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
On TECHxploration, your trusted tour guides, Craig and David, will explore every corner of Florida for the latest tech and innovations emerging within our communities as an inside look ahead at Florida's future.
Welcome to episode 14 of TECHxploration on the Florida Podcast Network. Here we're discovering all things tech and innovation thriving under the Florida sun. My name's Craig.
And I'm David. We are from Clarity Creative Group, an Orlando-based digital marketing agency. On to the episode.
We're going to talk about how BMW is trying to charge people monthly for heated seats.
Then Teresa Rand of the Boss Lady podcast tells us about how she used her show to grow her consulting business.
And we'll end the episode with this week's tech tip from Amy Kirkland. David, what the heck is going on here? BMW is getting in the microtransactions game. And what that means on the bigger picture is usually just monthly, right? Like a Sirius or XM membership or something like that. But this one's crazy. This is a monthly membership for heated seats. What's going on here?
Okay. All right. Here's an example, right? So heated seats will run for $18 a month. Heated steering wheel is $10 a month. High beam assisted headlights, $8 a month. Examples here, right? That, and it's a test and you could save money with multi-year commitments. But I have a question for you, Craig. As a Floridian, have you ever had a car with heated seats?
I mean, I have by accident because I had a trim level that had it, even though I've literally never used it.
Why didn't you use it?
Well, it's hot here, damn it.
It is. And isn't that interesting, right? Imagine if you're traveling somewhere, it's cold, and you only need it for 1 month. Maybe.
Wait a second. So you're breaking my brain in the best of ways, as you tend to do. Are you saying that this model theoretically could mean that either the base price of the car is a little bit cheaper, or I'm saving money if I'm not using it, or this is an add-on where they're getting me?
See, now this is what's really interesting about this, right? Because when I first read the headline, my thing was, well, gosh darn it, we're going to be nickel and dime for everything. However, in my mind, I'm going, oh, well, now if things are lowered, the microtransactions is what big now in the flights, right? And in flying.
Yes. And
And there's been some moments where it felt like, oh, we're getting hosed. We're still paying the same amount that we paid before when we got all these little things. But there's other moments where it's like, no, I don't need the extra bag, or I don't need that. So I'm glad I don't have to pay for that. And we've come out ahead. And I think this could benefit on certain things.
Interesting. Now, were they the only one? I don't know if you know this offhand. Are they the only one trying stuff like this? Because I know that they got pushback, and I think many did. Companies were trying to charge to use CarPlay in cars, and then the consumer said, no thanks. Like, I'll just not use it. How dare you, kind of thing. Like what Netflix did to us, David, where, you think, or what Disney Plus is already doing, where it started at $7 and then all of a sudden it's $9.99, then it's $11, then it's, but now there's commercials. Are we just inevitably going to be here whether we want it or not?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going there. And I think one of the first companies to do it, I believe, was Tesla. But in theory, this has existed a lot in cars or in other things where you probably might even go to the mechanic and maybe they would enable a feature that wasn't there before sometimes. So there's definitely other options where it just feels different because it's like you're buying the car, but you can't use it. Or it's kind of there, not there. But I wondered if you'd come out ahead that you didn't add it as a permanent thing to your car when you first bought it, and you only use it maybe for the 2 months out of the year in Florida, or the 2 days out of the year in Florida when it's nice to have heated seats. If in the maybe 3 or 5 year time of having it, or maybe it values for like a leased car, right? Where it's not your car to keep either.
I think it's really interesting for us to kind of keep our eyes and ears on the ground and of what's going on in the automotive industry and how they're going to try to Netflix us up. We got a big one here, folks. Very excited to introduce our guest, Teresa Rand, a successful business owner, career consultant, coach, runs a conference, but specifically we met at PodFest because we, David and I, were trying to learn all about how to grow this podcast. And we met Teresa, the boss lady, and knew we had to talk with her. Teresa, how you doing?
I am doing great. Happy day. It's good to be here.
We are very excited to have you, and I want to dive right in because, I know it's not going to be linear in terms of chronological, but we met because of podcasting. So you happen to have a very successful podcast called the Boss Lady Podcast, almost 100 episodes. It looks like it's weekly, 5.0 rating, a bunch of reviews. Can you share with us the origin of it? And obviously, you're staying with it. There was an episode that came out yesterday all about using your energy allotment wisely. So can you give us how it started and what fuels you to keep it going?
Yeah, I will tell you, of all the things I do in my business, this is probably the most fun. And it was the one that scared me probably the most. Quick story. Originally, when I started the podcast 2 years ago, I had a co-host, happens to be an old family friend who's college roommates with my husband, was a radio personality the majority of his career. And he actually owns a podcast studio that he built right before COVID. We were sitting on our back porch. We like to have a little bourbon, having a few drinks. And
love that.
I kept talking about wanting to do a podcast. And finally, Al said, I'm so tired of hearing you talk about this. Why don't you just do it? And I said, okay, then. Well, I'll do it if you'll co-host it with me. And he was like, the Boss Lady Podcast, you want me to co-host? I said, yes, I do. So he agreed and he hosted with me for almost a year. And then, as he likes to say, the student exceeded the teacher, which is not true, but he makes me feel good. And so now I do it from home. I don't have to go to the studio. I've got all the equipment. But those first ones, if you listen to those first ones, you can actually hear the nerves of my voice. And now it's just fun.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, though, because I think that's something interesting for any potential listeners that are not sure how to start or what to start. You know, you have other elements of your business, but for the Boss Lady, it seems like the podcast was the jump point. Is that accurate?
I had a Boss Lady membership organization already before I started the podcast, but it was about a year old and it's a local group. So the podcast was just to really, one of the things I've learned in business, Craig, is that the more I can get my face and my brand out there, I can't necessarily tie a client always back to they heard me on the podcast or they're part of a Facebook group or they saw me at a local chamber event. I don't know because I try to be everywhere, not to the point of being obnoxious, but just very professionally having a lot of touch points because you guys know better than I do. We don't know where people find us anymore. There's so many different avenues.
I know it. And gosh, I love that you said that because that is something that, we're a digital marketing agency in Central Florida. I think you're out of Daytona. Is that right?
Daytona Beach. Yep.
Yeah. And one of the hardest things for us is to, I think, kindly encourage some of our small business owners, because our clients are all small business owners, to think like you just said. So I kind of want to, this wasn't even on my list of things, but you said something that was like so engaging to everything we believe. To us, brand is so important, and getting in front of as many eyes, ears, that's the game. So is that something that you built into your coaching and you help other people with? Is just something you believe personally? Or where did that come from that you just inherently knew, like, I got to do this thing, whether I even want to or not?
Yeah, a couple of things. Great question. First of all, I work for the YMCA, which was well known for a brand.
Oh, yeah.
So I actually was a CEO with the Y the last 10 years of my corporate career, if you will. It was a nonprofit. Incredible. And during that time, the YMCA rebranded, which was a big deal for a company that's
massive,
over 150 years old, to rebrand. So I clearly get branding. But I hired someone to help me determine my brand for Teresa Rand Consulting and then ultimately the Boss Lady. So it doesn't matter what I've done since I started my business 4 years ago next month. I always reach out for help, especially on the technology side, but on the branding side, on the coming up with my logo side. I always try to get somebody that is an expert in what it is I'm trying to do.
We honestly feel that way as well, even though we are experts in specifically, let's call it SEO, for example, right? Sometimes things go outside of our expertise as well. We try to be real transparent with clients about that, but let them know we'll find who might be. And I'll give an example. Like, we were not experts in Facebook advertising, for example, but we knew this is years ago, we knew we needed to know it better or have someone to hand off to that's in the ecosystem. So we asked some trusted people. And it sounds like you're very like-minded that way, where if you don't have to know everything, you just have to have a willingness or the knowledge of how to find it. How does that statement hit you?
Absolutely, which is the reason I reached out to Al Smith, who is my co-host. One of the things that had happened to me, and I think this is important and relative to our conversation, I had been asked to be on 2 podcasts before I started mine, just talking about the boss lady, talking about Teresa Consulting. One of them was done in the kitchen of a young lady's house.
Cool.
And it was fun. I adored this young woman, but she had one microphone between the two of us. So every time one of us turned our head when the recording came out, it wasn't clear. So the second one I did, another young woman, she had all her, I call it a podcast in a suitcase, which I now know is pretty common, but we recorded the whole thing and she had some kind of glitch she wasn't aware of. Nothing worked. So we had to redo it. So what I said to my friend Al is, if I'm going to do a podcast, I don't know what microphone, what software, I don't know any of that. You have a studio. I will go to the studio because I believe we get one shot normally to come out with a quality product. And I wasn't comfortable doing it from home on my own until I learned a little more and had some build up that I did have a quality product. So that was important to me.
Absolutely. And I think it shows in the success of the podcast and of the overarching business. Now, as you got more and more comfortable with the podcasting, for example, did you upgrade your mic or you change how you were hosting? So for example, Florida Podcast Network supports us on this one, but some other things, and we might actually be talking with Tom from Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout is a podcast host.
Yeah.
And is that the one that you use or that you're familiar with as well?
It is not. I actually have just recently gone from the studio. I left the studio probably February and came home, and I was doing it on Zoom. And I have a gentleman that is my producer, and he edits everything for me because, again, I can figure that out. I don't like to do that stuff.
Same.
And
Teresa, same. That's where FPN has got our back. I can't do any of that.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, Bobby, I need you to do that. And he was actually on the podcast that you were referring to yesterday.
Oh, that's awesome.
But just in the less than 30 days, I've switched to Riverside FM, riverside.fm.
Tell me things. I for another project that I'm working on, our first episode launches Monday, and I'm using Riverside for that. Tell me everything. Good, bad. This is what I mean, Teresa. Like, tech comes in. Yeah. Riverside is brand new in terms of like the whole podcasting ecosystem. It's very well funded, like venture capital backed. Right. I've seen like Alexis Ohanian talking about it. I think he's got a piece of it. Tell me everything you know.
So here's the first thing I did. I knew 2 other podcasters that were using it, and I trusted their opinion. They both liked it. And then I had Bobby, my current producer, research it for me because he knows more of the technical stuff to ask than I do. I just want to know that it's easy for me to get in and out of and use and send him the recording.
Absolutely.
So that was why I had him on Riverside FM yesterday when we recorded yesterday. It came out yesterday. We recorded it earlier, obviously, but is because if anything went wrong, I wanted him on the back end. What I can tell you about Riverside FM thus far is I don't need Bobby on it anymore. I can figure it out. Now, I still am going to have him edit because I don't want to use my time to do that.
Of course.
But he jumps right in there. He edits it. It's done. And the sound was so much better than what I had been doing. I use a Yeti mic. I have a new webcam that I'm using because ultimately I want to put YouTube and do some video clips, which we're just beginning to start. So I upgraded my camera. I got a different microphone and I went to Riverside FM is, I call it cheap. It's rough. I don't want to tell them that, but it's relatively inexpensive.
I agree with you. I think their pricing is approachable. I think I paid $288 for a year or something like that.
Yep, exactly.
I'm really excited that you said that and brought that up. Again, no other way we would have known that necessarily. So I think it's very cool because that is an innovative tech thing that they've done. They know that podcasting has not jumped the shark by any means. I think it's still on the ramp up. I think we're still in a growth period for podcasting, and being able to do it easier or better quality is definitely the trajectory that whole kind of industry is going in. Now you do it's weekly, correct?
I do weekly. Yep.
And
99% of the time it comes out every Thursday.
Perfect. Hey, I get it. It's occasional tech hiccup here and there, right?
Yep.
And it also seems like you have a really high focus on content on your website. The reason I say that is the podcasts go up as blog posts, but also other blog posts go up. And it appears, again, from what I could see, that, again, another piece of technology you're using, Kajabi. Tell me the journey. Was that something you chose originally? Is that something that came midway through? Very powerful, what it can do. Is it okay to ask how you're using it?
Yep, absolutely. It is not what I came out of the gate with. I was using another product that I'm drawing a complete blank on now for my website. And when I realized I wanted to do a customer membership database, I again researched a couple, and Kajabi came out ahead. Again, I asked people I know, like, and trust what they're using. So I bought into Kajabi and moved my website over. It handles all of my payments through Kajabi for the membership piece that I do for the local community. And I love it. The money goes straight into Stripe, which is what I was on a call with before today, because I'm having a little trouble with Stripe, but it's user error, not the product. So I switched to Kajabi, probably switched over all of my membership stuff in March, but I started using it obviously 3 or 4 months ahead of time to get it all set up. And I've been very, very pleased with Kajabi.
Let's dive in on that membership side of your business. So that's not exactly the conference. The conference is more of like an annual type thing, right? So give me the levels there. So the membership, kind of explain that and how the access, obviously they can go to the site, teresarandconsulting.com, to read about it and access it. What are the levels to that game?
So when I started teresarandconsulting.com, there were a group of women that wanted to have a women's community, if you will. Hence, I gave birth to Boss Lady. It was not part of my original business plan. I do consulting for companies and individuals. But anyway, so I started Boss Lady, and it's a membership base. We're locally based here in Daytona Beach, although one day I would love to see them all over the place because it's a valuable group when women get together. And our premise is to educate, empower, and embrace each other. It's a $30 a month fee. We get together. We have events. We're going kayaking on Sunday. We have different book launches with authors that reach out to us. And then the podcast, I gave birth to the podcast during COVID. So they all just keep, it keeps stacking on, if you will, on the different things that I realize there's a need, or I call it a pain point. There's something that's missing. And if I have the expertise to fill that, I want to fill it. And then with Kajabi, because literally when I first started, people were Venmoing me and all these kind of things and RSVPing through text. And I was like, I can't, we're
That's
almost 100 women now. I can't do that. Hence Kajabi. Then we decided to have the conference, and we have people from all over the state come to the conference. This will be our second year. And that is, we have a keynote author, a lady who's written a book called Harness Your Inner CEO. That's the theme of our conference this year. So things just keep building. And what I find as I keep adding different elements, I've now taken on a business partner for the whole Boss Lady piece. I need different technology to handle it so that I don't look like a mom and pop.
Exactly. No. And tech helps us do that.
Right. Yeah, whether it's Kajabi or Stripe or what else have I used? Riverside FM, Anchor, Otter I used for a while. I don't need that anymore because Riverside, it works itself into other ways. But I've learned a lot more than I ever thought I would about technology. And there's so much more to learn.
Always. And every day that the technology changes, like you said, Riverside was not even an option, a few years ago.
Right.
So with that, obviously you have like the online courses and things like that. That seems like that definitely didn't happen 10 years ago. What made you want to put your stuff online? What made you want to go kind of digital?
I think because as the Boss Lady community grew, I realized that it could be more than maybe I even thought it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started the podcast, and I just go back to, what I said about the reason I went in the studio to begin with, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right. And now that does not mean I've not made plenty of mistakes. Some have been public mistakes, but it's not for lack of trying, and you just fix it and move on. But I really want things to be as quality as possible.
Right.
And everybody's online. If you're going to run a business today, I don't care if it is a local business. If you're not online, I just don't think you're reaching your potential.
Yes.
Whether it's Facebook or the SEO stuff, which is a whole nother ballgame that I'm still learning about. But I think it's just the way of the world. Half of the clients that I have in business right now is because people are not coming in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, they're only coming 1 or 2 days. So all of a sudden, a team that works together may never physically be in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
And my expertise is teaching people how to communicate better. So my day job, what I call Teresa Consulting, still is all about technology.
Right. We went through a similar change of workforce, right? As soon as the COVID thing, and we leaned on like Slack and things like that, but that doesn't, that's necessarily conversation. That is a form of communication or a way to communicate with people, right. But it's very different from, our first few couple of years in an office to then having to switch there. Were you prepared for that when that kind of happened?
I don't know that any of us were prepared,
Sure.
But I do strongly believe the fact that I keep things out, where I've got a Facebook group, I've got a private Facebook group. I have, you mentioned earlier, I have the podcast. I do a blog on Monday that ties into a live mini training, less than 15 minutes. I do on a private website called Career Cultivators. I do that on Wednesday. And then the podcast comes out, which is 30 to 40 minutes, all on the same topic. So somebody may want to read the blog. Somebody may want to hear just 10 minutes of the conversation. And then somebody may want to hear 40 minutes of a podcast. I don't know that anybody does all three. Maybe they do.
That's just to us how much you get it, in that people have to digest the content where they are, right? And it is, the onus is on the business or the business owner or their team to figure out the disbursement of whatever content it is. And it sounds like you even have the real forethought that content can be repurposed, meaning I see it, of like the podcast going to the blog and using clips and things like that. You even talking the way you were talking. It's just the way. And it's not because I'm trying to be like, guy that owns a digital marketing company, you should use me. It's not that. It's like, you don't need to use a company if you have some of these softwares. And on the social media side, maybe that's a Buffer or an Agorapulse or a Hootsuite or whatever helps you plan out content so that you can put it out, because it's not me or David saying you should do content. It's the overall market that's demanding things to digest, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And, even LinkedIn now, I just started a newsletter on LinkedIn where I'm trying to get people to subscribe. And by the way, I'm using the same articles that I write for my blog. I'm just switching the language a little bit.
As you should. That's
got to be more business,
repurpose.
It's
business
such a thing.
Focused. And a lot of this I learned at PodFest.
Oh, that's incredible.
Even when PodFest was virtual for 2 years, I went to every conference virtually and just listened and listened and listened. And then, of course, there was nothing like being live where, obviously I met you guys. I've been on 2 podcasts, people I met at PodFest. I have 2 people coming on my podcast coming up that I met at PodFest. So it's just, there's a wealth of knowledge out there if you just look for it.
We agree, not just on the podcast, but just on looking for knowledge. And it's always a part of what, David inspired me to become a fan of podcasts. Years and years ago, he was pushing on how much knowledge. And it is a little bit mind blowing. You're an example of this. Somebody with, literally the level of experience you don't get, regular people don't get in rooms with former CEOs of multi-jillion dollar organizations. You know what I mean? That's
Right.
not usually possible. But yet, for free, people can read your blog, people can sign up for your newsletter, people can listen to your podcast, and maybe one day, and maybe this is part of joining the group and getting involved, maybe have a bourbon with you. I bring that up because David and I happen to like bourbon. So
Okay.
not just because one day we may share one, but are there, this, I know this is on the more personal side, are there certain favorite bourbons for you?
Well, my husband and I, and here I'm going to show my ignorance because he's the one that usually buys it all. But we went and we did the Kentucky Bourbon Tour not too long ago.
Yes.
And we love
Us
Woodford's
as well.
Reserve.
Well, I love Woodford. I have it
Yeah.
at home
Great
now.
play. That was a fun
And
visit.
then I
That tour
wish
was
I
awesome.
could jump up and run into my kitchen because he just brought out a new one this week that starts with a T. I can't remember what it's called, but Maker's Mark is another one we really like.
That was my favorite tour,
Yeah.
even though Makers wasn't, I like Makers, but we took a friend for a bachelor party. We did the Bourbon Trail
yeah.
as well.
Perfect
Did you-
place.
Did you get to Buffalo Trace?
We did not. We actually were on our way to a wedding, so we only had one day. So we didn't get to all of them. We only got to those two. But
I think you did well, though.
That was plenty. We just,
You're absolutely, and Woodford and Makers are fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, you've got a speaking part at the conference with many
Mhm.
other, again, wonderful people. Your segment, Bourbon and Cigars, Succeeding in a Man's World, is
Yeah.
where that question came from, because really, I'm intrigued by this. So I'm also on a personal level networking in some digital spaces and meeting people. And there are some women's groups. And then bringing that into a recent thing we did is we helped a website get up called the Elle Collective, which is a women's kind of entrepreneurship program from Seminole State. And one of the questions that I think some men are always too timid to ask, but I'm trying to always ask is, what are the ways that a man like myself can be either an ally or a supporter without it being a negative thing for what's supposed to be a women's group? Does that make sense, that question?
It totally makes sense. I have a podcast that came out early on, and I'll have to look up, but it was by two gentlemen who are PhDs and both Naval Academy. They're really great guys. One of them is David Smith, and I'm trying to Google her quickly. The other one, Brad Johnson and David Smith. They've written a book totally about how and why men should mentor women. The first book was called Athena Rising, and I had them on the podcast very early on, because here's what I believe, and they say it much better. They're much smarter than I am, but
I don't know about that.
Athena Rising, actually, the tagline in the book is how and why men should mentor women. These two gentlemen are amazing. I've done some client work where I had two gentlemen that supervised a group of 70 people, of which 60 were female. So I bought them both a copy of the book, Athena Rising, because here's the deal. The fact of the matter is the majority of tables of power where decisions are made are still heavily male dominated. That's not a judgment. It's a fact.
Right.
So the only way, not the only way, that's a little strong, but it makes sense that if men already at the table of power can mentor some women to help them get there, why the heck not?
I agree. And is there any tips you could give, literally self-serving? Our listeners hear me say that a lot. For me, literally for me or for David or for any men that might be listening, what is a great way to be able to do something like that without it coming across
Right.
overbearing or,
Yeah.
dare I say, mansplaining?
Right, man. I was going to say, you took the words right out of my mouth. The way to do it, in my opinion, is to ask, just like you would another man. Hey, man, is there a way I can help you? What's your goal? Can I help you in any way?
Teresa,
do it
that's
with
the
me.
unlock. That's the unlock.
It's
It's such a simple answer, but the real truth is, I think that's the problem. I'll speak for myself, but I'm not always great at that. I'm not always great. It's almost like I'm thinking of solutions that people in my head, because that's the way I'm wired, and they may
Right.
not even want it. But if I had just asked rather than
Just
tell,
ask.
you know,
Just
like
ask.
that's so powerful.
It really is that simple because, and I get it. My husband tells me all the time, you know, as a middle-aged white man, I'm afraid to do fill in the blanks.
Yes.
Because nobody likes me. You know, that's it. That's you know, we have that conversation and you're right. It really is just reach out to where that person is and you'd be surprised. But, you know, I get it why men are afraid on a lot of levels. They don't know how it's going to be taken. What does it look like? And the book, Athena Rising, it covers all of that.
No, you gave us a real gem there because it is about the ask and it's about breaking through that fear. And what's the worst that can happen? They'll say no, thank you, kind of thing. And that's the funniest thing. Though now that episode of your podcast was called "Wanted: A Few Good Men," and
there you go. That's it.
Yeah, it's one of the earlier episodes.
Yep.
And overarching, you've got the Boss Lady podcast, you've got the conference, you've got the Boss Lady membership, you're consulting business as well. You've got a lot going on. I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us. Where would you want people to find you, right? Your website obviously is teresarandconsulting.com, but are there any specific things? You mentioned a LinkedIn newsletter. Where would you like people to find out what's going on?
You know, really, if you go to teresarandconsulting.com, I have links to everything else. On LinkedIn, it's just simply Teresa Rand. I don't separate personal and business. On LinkedIn, it's all business. You can go Teresa Rand on Facebook. There's the Boss Lady community on Facebook. Career Cultivators is on Facebook. But really, teresarandconsulting.com will kind of give you an overview. You can find the podcast, the blog, all of that stuff there. So that's Perfect. The easiest for one-stop shop, if you will.
Well, can't thank you enough. I mean, this has been awesome getting to talk through Riverside, Kajabi, how you started your podcast to, again, that foundation of just literally being a CEO of the YMCA. I mean, it's so interesting how we get to where we're at kind of thing and learning about it. So thank you so much for joining us on TECHxploration.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. You made it very easy. I was a little nervous about the whole tech thing. So I realized I used more than I think. I know more than I think I do.
You do. Like you saying Riverside was so like you wouldn't know this that I signed up for it like this week. I'm not joking with you. Like it's just so cool that way where while we're much of like what you do, we do business stuff. We're not a consultant or anything like that, but most of our day to day is dealing with clients. So it's like just forgetting that there's other tech applications that are outside of even like the development code that I'm not on the code side of our team. I'm more on the strategy and content side of it. So it was just awesome to speak with you. We're really excited to see what's next. And I think big takeaway, we just need to ask. We need to ask the women in our lives and be okay if they say no, but just ask if they want any help wherever they're going.
Right. That's worth the hour. Thank you so much, both of you.
Hi, I'm Amy Kirkland of Elle Collective at Seminole State College. My tech tip is to use the Windows key plus the period to get the emoji palette. And what I find best about that is that when you hover over each one of those emojis, it tells you what the emoji is, because there's been times when I've sent inappropriate ones or ones that don't mean what I'm trying to convey to people. So I just find the tip to be really useful on my laptop. I use it all the time, and hopefully you can too.
Great tip, Amy. You can go back to episode 11, hear our entire conversation with Amy. Find the link in the show notes.
For details and show notes about today's show, go to floridapodcastnetwork.com. And we want our community of Florida enthusiasts to grow. Join in with our superfans, the FPN Insiders, on Facebook, Clubhouse, and GoodPods. Just search for FPN Insiders. And of course, find us anytime at iwantclarity.com.
Be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. She's a boss. She's that boss. You know it.